Hello, friends. How's it going? I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for spending some time with us this morning. I'm Scott Hanselman, and I'm going to chat a little bit today about my thoughts on mentorship and when mentorship turns into sponsorship. And the reason that we want to talk about this topic is that it sets the tone for the next generation of developers, of application creators, and of people who are out there in tech trying to make their way. I've been in tech for a very, very long time, and I'm learning a lot from my new friends that are early in career. So I'm going to chat about that today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I was told that this was an unprofessional font, so I need to fix that. Apparently, Comic Sans is no longer cool. So I fixed the font. And then I was told that I needed some evocative stock photography. So I went and got some evocative stock photography. But then I was told that that was setting an unreasonable expectation about what a computer person's desk should look like. And that maybe, in fact, our desks don't look like that. So I switched it out for an actual computer person's desk. But I think that that is a fun way to show us how many, many different people work in many different environments. I have seen people tell me that this is what their desk looks like on Instagram, but I'm pretty sure that it's somewhere between here and my actual office behind me right now. Wherever you are, whoever you are, we welcome you here, and we hope that you have fun. I'm going to have my friend Abby pop in with comments and commentary throughout the course of the keynote, and then we're also going to be able to answer questions from y'all live. So hopefully that'll be good fun. First, let's talk about attitude and style. For people who are starting out in technology, it can be overwhelming. It can be scary, and how they are greeted, how they find people like us, how they find conferences like this, can really indicate whether or not they'll be long in the technology world, whether they'll stick around. So if tech welcomes them warmly, they're more likely to stay around. I've been in tech now for 30 years programming and now working at Microsoft. And I can attribute that to being welcomed and feeling welcome when I started out in tech many, many years ago. So that's what's great about conferences like this and communities like this, is that if people feel welcomed and that their voice is appreciated, that they're more likely to stick around and hopefully mentor and sponsor the folks that are coming up behind them. This is a really great magazine cover that I've got from March of 1984. And this young lady is on a TI 99A, and she's programming. She's got her pigtails and her bubble gum and working on her software program here. And it makes me miss those days of having magazines, but it also shows how useful it was and how helpful it is to be kind of seen and represented on a magazine like this. Hey, Abby.
Hi, Scott. I absolutely love this magazine. I love the bubblegum, and I love exactly what you said about how this kind of shows that tech is for everyone. I feel like in some ways we've deviated from that. I know that we kind of go into that a little bit further, but why do you think we've deviated from that? And, what are some ways that we can kind of come back and bring it back to the bubblegum, the pigtails, and, making tech for everybody?
Well, when you get together with your family, I'm sure that you hang out with them at the holidays and you end up talking to your cousin or your aunt or your uncle, and then they go, "Oh, yeah, Abby, she's in tech. That's not my thing." They self-select themselves out of it. You go over to the house on Thanksgiving and your mom's like, "When we're done with the turkey, can you reboot the router? Can you run Windows Update? Can you update my machine?" Because they don't feel empowered. I think that we, over the last 30 years, have set up an environment of us and them, the techies and the non-techies. And that's unfortunate. We're self-separating. We're implying to them that it's some secret code that they can't learn. And I think that's where I think we went wrong. Somewhere in the late 80s, early 90s, we started changing that. There's a lot of interesting research and a lot of interesting articles that have been written on that, because tech was while uncomfortable, and certainly in the 40s and 50s and things like Hidden Figures, women spent a lot of time in software as computers. Then it seems to oscillate back and forth. I think the point is that everybody should be able to use a hammer and everybody should be able to use a computer. And we want to encourage people to do that. And a big place that starts is mentorship. And we're going to talk about that.
Scott, and I'll pop on out now.
Fantastic. All right. So this is a really interesting quote, and this sometimes gets used a lot. It says, "Inclusion isn't being asked to dance. Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance." But I don't think inclusion is being asked to dance. A better quote is that inclusion is being a member of the party planning committee. That's great. It's bigger than just going to a party. I use these pictures on the right-hand side here because we grew up with these cartoons, during the 80s and 90s that were a Power Rangers group of 4 or 5 kids, and it was basically one kid of every flavor. And that is an artificial diversity. Diversity includes hidden disabilities and veteran status and age and where you grew up and the languages you speak and all the different kinds of things like that. So I really like using the idea that it's inclusion as being a member of the party planning committee rather than it's being asked to dance, because we don't know who runs that dance. And to that question that Abby brought up, I think it's a really interesting analogy. This idea of the technology priesthood. Hundreds and hundreds of years ago, who could read? Not who could work on a computer, but who could read? And ultimately, it was the priest. It was the people up in the cloister, and they had the books, and they kept those books from others. But with technology right now, we have the ability to let anyone make an app, anyone create a website. So why shouldn't we make that knowledge free and available to them? And this is an interesting quote here. It says, "Knowledge is power, and it tends to be hoarded. And experts in any field really don't want people to understand what they do, and sometimes can enjoy putting people down." Now, that's not our community here. And it sounds like someone could have written that in 2021. It was actually written in 1974. And it's an acknowledgement that once you learn how to do something, it can sometimes be challenging to turn around and want to give that information away, because now I know how to do a thing. But as we learn in community and social media, things are better when they are shared and when people are enabled and empowered to go and create stuff. So rather than being priests that have all the information about, Dynamics, the Power Platform, and the ability to create apps without code and low code and no code, we hide out and we twirl our virtual mustaches and, steeple our fingers together, we can go and share that information and make other people feel empowered as well, because nobody wants to be a gatekeeper. Gatekeeping is this idea that decision making and information flow is being managed at some gate where it's like, oh, you've only been working on apps for a year. You can't come to DynamicsCon. You can come next year though, right? Those arbitrary gates, those arbitrary hurdles that we put in front of people can be really challenging. Having a degree is one. It's kind of a challenging situation because I'm happy that I have a degree. It took me 11 years to get my 4-year degree. I'm proud of myself. I think my degree is useful, but it doesn't necessarily mean that my degree and my journey is what is needed for the next person. And maybe that person can do a great job without a degree, or a degree in music, or a background in geology. So having degrees, certifications, and things like that can sometimes be a kind of a gate that we put in front of people. And I have my own internal biases because I'm like, well, I got a degree. They should get a degree too. And that's can be really challenging. Abby, you're muted. You're muted.
There we go. Wanted to make sure I didn't interject, at the wrong time
No,
while you were
please.
speaking, of course. Work from home things. With the whole aspect of gatekeepers and sharing your knowledge, kind of what's the benefit to the, I don't know, the mentor, the gatekeeper? I know it's to continue tech, but wouldn't that make, the job field a little bit more competitive? Tech is so competitive already. What's the benefit to those who are the so-called experts in this and sharing their knowledge?
That's a great question. And that's a tough one because you're basically saying, what is the benefit of being a nice person and being altruistic, right?
Exactly.
I want to share that information out there. And I think that people don't realize that by sharing that information, it actually makes things better for everyone. It actually makes the work better for everyone. You knowing what you're doing makes my job easier because then we are a more effective team. But if I keep all of these things secret to myself, then I have to do a lot more work. So if you are a good programmer, a good developer, a good application maker, you will hopefully be inherently lazy, because the great thing about computers is that they are something that works on things repeatedly. It's like, hey, I did a thing. Now I can do a thing n times. now I can leave and I can go to, Chipotle. But in fact, if you don't know what you're doing because I'm hiding information from you, then I got to do all the work. So sharing information, many hands makes light work. And I've actually got a slide that answers your question, because I think that sharing your energy and putting out that good work uh, will bring that energy back to you, right? You know, those people that you bump into the internet that have been putting out good content for years. You go, there's Abby again. I saw her blog on LinkedIn and now she's over here. Oh man, that's good stuff, right? All right. One of the things that I also talk about is this idea of not wasting your keystrokes. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes as well, because if you put good information out, social media allows you to amplify your information and share that with more people while you sleep, which is super important. But ultimately, I really believe that if you're kind and helpful for years on the internet, the energy will come back to you. And that can be super, super powerful. So I said, don't waste your keystrokes. This is an interesting philosophy that I picked up from a librarian named John Udell many, many years ago. And the idea is that you have a finite number of keystrokes left in your hands before you die. These are my hands. They have problems. I've had surgery on them, but there is so many keystrokes in them, and no amount of typing faster is going to get me more keystrokes. There's how many there are. So that is kind of a morbid thought, but it also informs how I interact with people and how I choose to. Let's say, for example, that after this chat, Abby or one of you has a great question for me. Sends me a question. Says, "Hey, good talk, Scott. Wholly adequate talk. I appreciated your time. I have a question." And I'm like, "I don't know you. I don't want to give you the gift of 1,500 of my keystrokes. So I won't answer." Well, that's not helpful. But at the same time, if I just email you directly and I slap the keyboard for, 2,000, 3,000 keystrokes, those keystrokes are never coming back. You might argue that I've gone and put that information out for one person, so I should be happy about that and I should help people. But where's a place that I can put those keystrokes that will help both the stranger who emailed me and other people? And the answer is anywhere with a URL, literally anywhere at all. A blog, a power app, a PowerPoint, a OneNote, a SharePoint, literally anywhere that I can send someone a link to, a knowledge base. Then in the email, I include a link to that. So for example, I've been blogging for many, many years, and I have a blog up here at Hanselman.com. I'll actually show it right here. And if you go to the blog and you click on date, you can actually see that the blog has been going on since 2002. So 20 years of blogging. And if we scroll, it's basically every Tuesday and Thursday for the last 20 years. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm a particularly good writer or particularly prolific writer. It just looks cool when you put it on a calendar, right? But if you think about how many emails you've sent, you probably could put them in a blog, right? So stop sending emails, start writing knowledge base articles, start writing wikis and OneNotes and SharePoints and sending links to those. Do that for 20, 30 years, and you too will be a mid-level blogger. That people that, that's that guy from that thing. Point being, if someone has information, like Abby said, and I want to share that, the best place to share it is anywhere with a URL, and then those keystrokes multiply. I write the email once, I go to sleep, 10 people visit my blog. Now my keystrokes are now 10x, which is hugely, hugely powerful. And I think adds up, the karma adds up, the good karma adds up over the course of many years. But one of the things that we need to watch out for is, am I a pro? Am I an expert? Am I fancy that I have this blog and I have this platform, and that, I'm out there talking about stuff and Abby's out there talking about stuff and our wonderful speakers here at DynamicsCon are talking about stuff? Here's the deal. Here's the secret, right? We're all just amateurs. We're all amateurs. There are no professionals. There are just people who are collecting experience, but those experiences change and everyone's experience is different. I mentioned my degree before. That degree was from 25, 30 years ago. All those languages are dead. All of the computers, all the operating systems, all of the techniques are long gone. So why did I go to school, right? What do I do with all those years of experience? Well, what I learned was how to learn. So when we're sponsoring people, when we're mentoring people, we want to give them a sense of not just here's the help documentation to read, here's the function to call, but we also want to teach them how to learn, teach them how to be resilient in technology so they stick around. We want people to have a many year long healthy um, career in technology, because sometimes we'll bump into people who are maybe we work with these folks and they say, oh, I've got 20 years experience, I've got 20 years experience. That's great, congratulations, I'm glad that you're still here. Is it 20 years of unique and interesting experience, or is it the same year 20 times? And that could be a really painful and difficult thing to even ask. Like I said, I've been in tech for 30 years, but when I sat down and took stock of it, when I sat down, I said, I think about 7 years of that, I was kind of sleepwalking. Just years I didn't learn, didn't do any training, didn't really feel like I grew. The pandemic might be a year like that for you. That's okay. But acknowledging it is important, because when it's time to leave a job or to leave a bad situation or to mix it up, try a new tech or a new technique, because you don't feel like you're growing and you're not learning. So do you have N years experience, or do you have the same years experience N times? And then ask yourself, well, how is that different from someone who is moving and growing and trying new things and getting those opportunities? We want our early in career and emerging developers and application creators to have those opportunities as well, so that they can grow. One of the things that I use to keep me humble is I think about the inventor of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee, of course, is the inventor of the World Wide Web, rather, not Vint Cerf. And Tim Berners-Lee, in this interview here, where he's introducing the documentation for the web platform, you can see he's got his title, his job title, web developer. He's not senior web developer. The greatest flex that Tim Berners-Lee could have put on his business card would have been the web developer. I mean, imagine if you met someone at a party and they hand you a business card. You go, "Oh, Tim Berners-Lee, how's it going? What do you do? Oh, I'm a web developer. Oh, a web developer? No, the web developer. I made it. That was the thing that I made." And the fact that he doesn't put senior there, I thought was a really classy move. And that made me realize that, all right, well, if the inventor of the web doesn't know what he's doing and he's learning as fast as he can and he's reading the documentation, then maybe I'll just relax a little bit about my job title as well. So that was kind of a fun way to think about things. Um, the years of experience that I give is more of a rolling window of experience rather than accumulation of things, because a lot of the things that I worked on don't exist anymore. So let's move on to this slide here and think about actual mentorship. When we're looking for a mentor, it's important to realize that it's not always age related. Sometimes I think we say junior engineers and senior engineers, and old engineers and young engineers. And I joke about my time in tech and my age sometimes, but I have mentors as well. This is not necessarily all about us, the audience, going and finding mentees. I want to encourage us to find mentors, because you're never too old to get good advice. And I think that's a really important reminder to us all, that if you haven't had a mentor, if you haven't had an advisor, a person to give you their thoughts on your personal growth, on your career growth, find one. Doesn't matter your age, you can go and do that. Then be a mentor. You can do these things simultaneously, right? You are never too young to share your experience. So even if you're 22 or 24 and you're just in the first decade of your experience in tech, find someone who is you in the past, a Loki variant of you who's just diagonal, and help them out. So if you're 4 years out of school, find someone who's heading out of school. If you are early in career, maybe offer your new, fresh perspective and the technologies that you understand to someone who is later in their career, so that they might re-energize themselves. So you should be a mentor and find a mentor at the same time. And I think that's an important thing to remember. So now we get to the actual juxtaposition of mentorship versus sponsorship. The term mentorship is overloaded sometimes, and people are like, "Well, is mentorship just a a regular lecture from an old person. I used to think about mentorship being, well, yeah, I have my mentor come in and they give me a speech once a week, and then I get energized. It's like a uh, a cheerleading session or a pep talk from the coach. But there's a difference between being a mentor and being a sponsor. We're going to break that down in a moment here.
Hey
Abby,
Scott,
Abby.
with the hey, how you doing? How's your speech going?
My
Or
speech
your
is
entire
great.
keynote? um, I had Belinda here, and she said that she loves picking the minds of IT newbies. They have a different perspective on social media, business, and the world at large. Do you have any input on that with your experience working as a mentor, kind of how you've benefited from, is a mentor-menteeship sponsorship? Is it kind of like this? Is it more like this? Can it be both ways? Is it flip-flop? How do you kind of view it in that aspect with the IT newbies?
Yeah, I love that you put your hands like this, because this is exactly what I do. So right now, you and I are having a conversation,
Yeah.
and people can watch if the conversation starts to go like this. And if I start talking to you in a certain way, or if I say something I don't understand about, Power Platform, and then suddenly Abby's like, "Oh, Scott," and it's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Right? There's an
Mhm.
implicit power dynamic within the context of any conversation. When
Mhm.
you go to the store and you need help, you're like, "Hey, I'm really sorry, I need some help." "Okay, I have the power here." And those things move. What you want to make sure is that if you are in a mentorship relationship with someone, if you're meeting with them weekly or whatever occasionally, that you understand that those power dynamics change. So to your point about new people in IT, if I'm signing up for a weekly lecture from Scott, that can be a dynamic like this, and I'm missing out on the information that those early in career people have. So I want their fresh perspective. I want to think about things differently. I've got a lot of information. I've been around a long time, but I don't have a lot of new, curiosity. And my Siri's talking to me there. Sorry, I don't have a lot of new energy about new ways of thinking, and I don't have, my perspective is based on all of these years of cementing my perspective. Sometimes getting a new person in IT to kind of slap you around and give you a, like, no, think about it like this. And if you're listening, if you're open to hearing, like my Ted Lasso shirt, uh,
Yeah.
then you're going to go, oh, I never thought about that. So I really try to have those relationships stay like this, so that we're both sharing information as opposed to me lecturing them.
I completely agree. I love that point from Belinda. I just had to jump in and let you know that they're definitely hearing you loud and clear.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. All right. Thanks, Melinda, too. All right. So if we look at our slide here and we look at the words on the right there, that mentors are these mirrors that help you define your dream. They help you plan the future. Think about your strengths. But sponsors, sometimes these words are interchanged. Sponsors are different. Sponsors are like spotlights. They create luck. Sometimes you can be someone's luck by lifting them up into new spaces. I've used this term "be the luck," and for a while I had a hashtag on Twitter called hashtag "be the luck." And the idea is, if you look back on your career, how many times did something lucky happen where it's like, oh, if I hadn't met that person, if I hadn't gotten their business card, then this situation wouldn't have happened and I wouldn't have had my career. Uh, Turns out, of course, that luck is the combination of an opportunity presenting itself and you being prepared for that opportunity. For a lot of people, though, they are prepared for opportunities, but they don't seem to present themselves. What we can do as later in career people is create opportunities by simply putting them into a room or a space that they wouldn't have had before. There's a wonderful talk by a gentleman named Anwan Simmons, Anjuan, Anwan Simmons. And Anwan has a talk called Lending Privilege. And he's a Black man in tech, but he also has some positional privilege in his space as a technology leader. So he likes to lend that privilege to other people by bringing them into spaces. So as an old person in tech, I can say, hey, come to this meeting with me. And I've had these wonderful experiences where I've had someone just starting out at Microsoft or just starting out in tech, and I bump into them in the hall and I say, hey, you want to come to our stand up or you want to come to our meeting? And just by introducing them into that space, I don't have to do anything. just put them there. Doesn't cost me anything. And then they might ask a question, and then they'll meet a friend, and then they'll have lunch with that person. Think about all those opportunities where you met someone and they introduced you to someone and they said, hey, Abby, you should talk to so-and-so. And just by saying, oh, ABC, attaching the lines, and then they go off and they have a chat, and then maybe they have a 20-year work relationship. Those things can be really, really powerful. There's so many opportunities that I have been prepared for that were presented, and I was like, this is it. This is the person that's going to make my career go to the next level. Lending privilege is a really cool thing that we can do when we're later in career by saying, hey, come and hang out with me at DynamicsCon, and we're going to talk about all kinds of cool stuff. And the fun thing about that is that you have unlimited amounts of it. I can be doing that kind of great work all the time. So sponsorship, let's break that down. Let's look at the next slide here. Sponsorship is in fact a spectrum. Let's make that slide big. Perfect. So when you think about sponsorship, what is a sponsor going to potentially do? This is actually a link from a class that was taught at Stanford. Well, there's sponsors and mentors that strategize, like, hey, I've got this thing that's going on at work, and I want to make sure I get promoted. Can you help me figure out a strategy? That's a role that a person can play as a sponsor in your life. Then there's the connector. I'm a big fan of this. I love connecting people. I call it the transitive property of friendship. So it's like, okay, so like I know Abby, and maybe Abby knows someone else, and then she introduces me to someone else. So it's like, wait a second, I'm cool with Abby, Abby's cool with you, then we're cool. And that's called the warm intro. Sometimes people call it the good old boys network. I don't like that. I like that we should reclaim the good old boys network and include this social graph of cool people that are doing great work, and think about it as a warm introduction rather than a secret club. So when you meet someone and you can introduce them to someone else because you're like, this is a person that you should know, you can give those connector opportunities, and that's where interesting stuff happens. I have had people email me 10 years later and say, I saw a tweet or you mentioned someone's name and I had coffee with them, and now we work together, or now we do business together. So being a connector and turning that into an opportunity giver, kind of a relationship, is a really exciting part of being a sponsor. Opportunity giver is super fun as well. If you're given the opportunity to give a talk, can you turn it into a panel? Bring people with you, maybe bring a demoer. If you're going to be giving a presentation to the vice president about work that your team is doing, who in your team could use a boost? Bring them along at the meeting, give them a chance to shine. Costs you literally nothing to do that. You have an unlimited amount of ability to do that kind of stuff. And in the process, you then advocate for those other people, and then they make their own careers and they go off and do amazing things, which is great. The other thing that's important to remember about these relationships, and this is kind of a tough one, is they are not forever. Sometimes people will start mentorship relationships and they'll say, well, I'm going to meet with this person, every Friday for a half an hour. That can be overwhelming, right? It can be just in time. You could say, well, let's meet twice a month for a half an hour and then on demand when I need to. But it's also important to be able to say, I think we're done. I think we're good. I think I've achieved what I needed to achieve. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your mentorship. And then I'm going to move on to the next thing. I have a different career phase. That has happened to me as well. I was mentoring someone in a technical capacity. They moved into sales, and they're like, "This is great. Well, we'll chat every once in a while, but I don't think we need our weekly one-on-one." And of course, that reminder that I've said before, that mentorship is a two-way street. It's not necessarily a scheduled lecture from an old person. It's an interaction. It's a two-way street. So remembering that it's not forever. Now, I'm going to take a sip of my Diet Coke breakfast. And let's think about some stories that I like to tell that are tech stories. And I think we all have those tech stories, and how I use them to teach concepts as I try to mentor the folks that I work with. Because I think that storytelling is a really, really great way to connect with the next generation and tell them about all the great stuff that we've built and encourage them to build cool stuff as well. I have a knife on my desk here. It's a Swiss Army knife. It's kind of giant and massive, and my dad gave it to me when I was 12. And he mentioned that it is kind of a lousy pair of scissors and a mediocre measuring tape. It's got like a weird little compass. It has a bunch of tools on it that are not very good. These tools are kind of mediocre tools. The saw is kind of cool, but you're not exactly going to saw an entire tree. You're going to saw a branch with that. But what he told me was that it was okay to be a funny little knife that isn't amazing at everything. And I have that on my desk because, everyone should have a Swiss Army knife. They're super cool. It even has a pen and a pair of tweezers inside. So, but one of the things that a Swiss Army knife is good at is being a knife, right? At least be a good knife. Don't skimp on the basics. Even if you go out there and you learn all the technologies and all the latest things, don't skimp on the basics. So within the context of Power Platform or Dynamics or no code and low code solutions, what are the basics? The basics are the internet. The basics are the web, basics of HTTP, certificates, DNS, and stuff like that. A good analogy that I like to use is being a driver, right? Are you a driver of a car, or are you an Uber rider? Think about the layering of that. Now, all the different ways that you can get from point A to point B. You can rent a car, lease a car, buy a car. You can take the bus. You can drive in an Uber. You can be a passenger in an Uber. But when the car breaks down, who's going to fix it? Well, those are the layers of abstraction around responsibility. And the same thing applies in the world of computers. My father told me that I should learn how to drive a stick shift because at some point you're going to have the opportunity to drive someone to the hospital and you're going to race to find a car, and the only car available is a stick shift, and you don't know how to drive stick. So that person's dead now because you never learned how to drive a stick shift. He had a little bit of drama in his presentation style. But the point there being that I didn't know how the car worked. I know how to push the thing and push the gas, and that was pretty much it. He took it too far because he said, I don't want you to drive a car unless you can change the oil and change the tires. And it's like, well, hang on. Am I a mechanic or am I going to drive a car? He was gatekeeping, but you're a more competent driver if you can change your tires. You are a more empowered driver if you can change your tires, or at least one, right? Or at least know that tires exist as a concept. I think I'm a more empowered driver if I can change my oil. But I only changed my oil once. I did it to prove that I could do it, and now I pay someone to change my oil. So you see the difference there. If you can acknowledge that, I live at this level, but I'm going to go one level down. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not going to build a car from scratch. I'm not going to smelt my own iron and steel and create the car from basic parts. But I am going to acknowledge that there's a layer of abstraction where this car operates. If I'm an Uber rider, the Uber breaks down, I get out of the car. That's the Uber driver's problem. Now I'm just going to go and get another Uber. But if I can help fix that, I'm going to be a more useful member of society. And those times when you're at work and someone helps you with a problem, and you're like, how do they know that? They're a genius. That's amazing. They're not a genius. They just know one layer below. So that brings me to thinking about the things in technology that can make us more successful developers. Abby.
Now, Scott, we've talked about this. I'm not the technical one. You don't want me changing anyone's tires, changing anyone's oil. How do I play into this? How are the people who are functional consultants? How do we kind of come into this mix of layering and being a good knife and, changing oil when I feel like I'm not the one to be doing any of those things?
Well, so let's think about that. You are technical. Mm-hmm. You work on technical solutions all the time. You may not be in a coding role. And I think that gets to that conversation that we had at the beginning where you're at a party and you're like, your relatives are apologizing for not being technical. Mm-hmm. That became a thing. Like, oh, I'm not technical. I've met technical account managers with the word technical in their titles telling me they're not technical. Just because you're working with boxes and lines and creating cloud solutions doesn't mean, I'm not asking you to take a core dump from a Linux container and, pop the registers out. You're technical. Don't apologize. Not you, Abby, but anyone. Don't apologize for not being technical. Just say, I'm not in a coding role, or I don't operate at that level, right? I'm not going to go to the mechanic and apologize for not being a mechanic. They might say something about mechanical stuff, and I'll go, I don't operate at that level. I operate at this level. You see the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm definitely the one to be apologizing at the mechanic. Our unfortunate Microsoft 365 team gets to deal with my silly questions about only checking my US holidays box and having my calendar broken for, 3 weeks. And it turns out it wasn't. So I won't be the one. I'll, take a little bit more of empowerment with that.
Yeah, I think that not apologizing is a power move. And keep in mind that I'm from Portland and we're basically Canadians and we apologize every 5 minutes. So we invented apologizing for stuff. It's just, oh, sorry, sorry. Oh, do that all the time. That's like the standard Portland thing. But I try
Mhm,
not to do that because I don't have anything to apologize for. And nor
mhm,
do you. So I would say to our friends that think of themselves as non-technical, they're
mhm.
on the internet, they're working a remote office job, they're creating or facilitating the creation of applications and solutions. They are, in fact, technical. I don't think that an Uber rider should apologize for not driving the car. We're still getting from point A to point B. So that's my perspective. But the stories that I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you, and I'll be interested in when you pop in the middle of them,
Mhm,
I'd be interested in like, oh yeah, I never thought about that way. Maybe I am more technical than I thought, or maybe there's stuff underneath. Actually, don't go away. Let's do this. I'm going to bring up a slide and you and I will go through this together. Okay.
yeah.
Problem solving, technical problem solving, Abby, is
Mhm,
asking yes, no questions at scale. If you
mhm,
can ask a question, you can bisect the problem space and you can go, is it this? Is it that? Okay. Now I've eliminated an entire set of problems. All right. Technical
mhm.
interview question live at DynamicsCon. Abby, ready?
Okay, let's do it.
My toaster is broken.
Okay,
I want toast. What should I do?
buy a new one.
No. So buy a new toaster is a great example of like, oh, I got a spot on my carpet. What can I do? Well, you burn the house down, you buy a new house, right? There's no other solution, right?
Yeah.
But if we're going to break this down as a systems thinker, I have a toaster, it's not working. Where should I even think about looking to debug this toaster situation?
Um, I don't know, take out the toast probably first, maybe unplug it.
Right?
Maybe after
Unplug
that,
it.
if there's there we go, power on. Maybe open it up if you can.
See, you're
Maybe there's a
already thinking
coil.
about you're already
Mhm,
thinking about opening it up, right? Like that's the engineer brain. Okay, well, what's going on? Is the
mhm,
power on? What's inside, right?
mhm.
You know, plug is something. Can I plug in a lamp? Right?
See
What
if
are some
the
other things you can do?
outlet's working.
Yep, perfect. Love it. Is the
Mhm,
outlet working? See, you're already there. This is
yeah,
systems thinking, right?
mhm,
What we're doing is we're thinking about the space within which the toaster operates. Why does this thing, this block, this black box of toast maker not work? Well,
mhm.
if you just look at the toaster, you could buy a new toaster and it still wouldn't work because we're now talking about electricity, right?
Yeah.
So it turns out that our original plan of buying a new toaster would have caused nothing. We'd be right back and we'd have two toasters that didn't work. So when we think about the system that it lives in, hey, I have a project, it's not working. Is it DNS? Is it a certificate that expired? Is a hard drive full? All of those kind of questions. The difference between early in career and later in career people is just that we've lived that, collected the list of things that can go wrong, and we
Mhm,
have it more readily available. And the way that earlier in career people get those lists is by sticking around in tech to collect them. Failing fast and failing often in a safe place is how you collect those. So, is there any power on it all? I gave this talk at a young girls who code event, and a 14-year-old said, "Do the neighbors have power?"
Checking like the Facebook neighborhood group and
Yeah,
asking,
let's
does
go on
anybody have
next
a
door.
toaster that works?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, look outside and see if the neighbor's lights are on. What a freaking great, that's a debugger.
Yeah.
They thought they were going to learn about programming, and I'm asking them to
Mhm,
fix my toaster. And then she yells out, do the neighbors have power? And I'm
mhm.
thinking, that's a coder, and they don't even know it yet, right? Because that's thinking about systems. Turns out then it went off the rails, and one of them thought that maybe there was like an electromagnetic pulse from aliens, and the entire city was out. But at that point, you know, I know what
Yeah,
the
those
problem
are
was.
at that point it's out of your control and there's nothing you can do.
Exactly. There's
At
a
that point
power
you buy
outage.
a new toaster.
Yeah, that we need to buy a lot more than a toaster at that point.
Yeah.
So This right here is what's called system thinking. So to our conversation
Mhm.
before about what's technical and what's not,
Mhm.
you and many others in our community are technical systems thinkers. It's
Mhm.
simply the like, when did my son learn that a fuse was a thing? When I told him it was a thing, and then he files it away. And when things go wrong, he checks the fuse. So
Yeah.
what are the fuses in the applications that we build, here in this community, and
Mhm.
then collecting that list of stuff? Because the only difference between an early in career and a later in career person, let's bring this slide up here, is early in career people Google a lot. Maybe they Google with Bing, while later in career people can ask one question and eliminate an entire class of problems. By you saying, is the power on? You just split the problem space in half, and now I don't have to worry about that. Okay, yeah, I plugged the lamp in, power's not on. Okay, well, we know it's probably not the toaster, it's probably something else. And that sent us down a different path. That's very technical systems thinking, problem solving.
Well, my outlets go out a lot, so I guess that's just back to experience. It's just an experience I've had a whole lot of times.
See, exactly. You can't vacuum and make popcorn at the same time. We just know not to do that.
You can't blow your hair dryer while three other people are blowing their hair dryer. That one we
That's
had to
right.
learn the hard way.
Well, and as our famous President Abraham Lincoln says, it's always DNS. Let's bring up this slide here. It's always DNS. I heard that on the internet. It's always your domain registration that's a problem. On the left-hand side here, I made a list of things that can go wrong with web applications. I just made it up. And I made this
Yeah.
list because I was thinking about all of the stuff that I just know. I don't know why I know this. Like, I could come up with a list of 50 more. I could make a 20-page book, which is just yes, no questions of stuff to check when the website is down. Think about what that must feel like as an intimidating experience for an early in career person. And the only difference is that I've been here longer. So how do we get that information into your head, into people, that are like maybe in the first 10 years of their career? You let them have the experience, right? You bring them into companies and you let them fail without fear. Don't you think?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think somebody had said, teach a man to fish versus giving a man a fish. And I fully agree. The only way to understand these patterns is to kind of experience it and go through it, or write a blog about it and let someone like me Google it. I'm very good at Googling. You can ask all my coworkers. I can Google anything and I'll find it. But that doesn't mean that I know what's going on, but I can find the blog about it.
That's interesting that you bring that up. Googling well and successfully is in fact a skill in itself, because we all know that we've had experiences with non-technical relative and non-technical parent who's like, I've been Googling all day. And you add one additional term and then you find it and they're like, how did you find? I'm just a better Googler than you are. Sorry.
my my absolute favorite thing is the like long paragraphs of questions that my mom puts into the search bar of like, does if the moon is like this whole thing, and I'm like, it's a lot of unnecessary details, but she just never learned how to Google correctly.
Yeah, those kinds of things get into, again, systems thinking. My wife is a nurse. She's not a coder, so she'll write questions like, why, what is the cause of the tide? Is it the moon? Da, 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 da. And it's just like, and I'll just go like moon, tide, reason, or whatever, and then hit enter, and I'm like on the first page.
Yep. No, it was a
Those are
skill that I had to learn too. It definitely wasn't something. I was my mom for a very long time until I was told that that's not how you Google, and I had to learn that one. So I fully
exactly.
agree.
In this list here, we've got another thing that is interesting that my kids added here that says, it's never twins, which is a Sherlock Holmes quote. It's never twins is you might think that's the problem, but it's not. That's not the problem. When there's a Sherlock Holmes episode where this woman kills her husband, but then her alibi is that she was across town, and Watson is like, oh, well, she was on the other side of town. Everyone saw her. It's twins. There's twin sisters, and they killed her. And Sherlock Holmes says, even though that might feel like a friendly and accessible answer, it's never twins. So it's if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras, is the other Occam's razor there. All right, moving on from problem solving to layering as we get towards running out of time here. We're going to have to do some questions as well. when we have layers of solutions, that layering is vertical, like layering hides complexities from ourselves. And this is one of the things that is important to this community more than any other, is that we've got solutions that are sitting on top of complex solutions. Layering is actually lying. Our solutions are and systems are being lied to. And that's okay, but it's acknowledging what's underneath that system is super important. Here's a great example that I like to give. Let's make this one a large screen. If we look at this email here, we send email all the time. We don't really think about it. We don't usually think about what's underneath the email. Let me take this and flip it around and show you what's behind it. Did you know that an email is just name value pairs as text? It's just name value pairs as text with all the metadata, as well as the content type like text plain or image JPEG. And then if we look at sending an HTML form, maybe we're going to go and post an HTML form. That HTML form is also name value pairs. A lot of people don't realize that the way that email gets sent around the internet as text over a port is basically the same way that HTTP moves around. So email, HTML, HTTP, SMTP, surprisingly similar things that you haven't really thought about as being very similar. It's all just traffic. All ideas grow out of other ideas. An example that I like to use is a hard drive, as we see on the left here, and a record player, both encoded data on a circular disk, right? These are all reused ideas. A Blu-ray and an RCA Victrola here are all just circular bits of information. When you think about that, when you have the historical context, you have a lot of power, and it enables you to do really cool stuff. You can use that information to understand how systems are put together. You can read about these things and learn more about the systems that you're already building and the things that you take for granted. Here's a story about something that I took for granted. I met this very kind gentleman here, Chris Connor. He was in a show called Altered Carbon on Netflix, and in the show he plays an AI, he plays an artificial intelligence in the form of Edgar Allan Poe, and he just chews up the screen. He's an amazing actor, and you should check it out. Search for Altered Carbon and Poe, P-O-E. And I saw him on Twitter, and I chatted him, and I said, you're great. I think you're awesome. Turns out he was in Portland at the time. I said, let's go out to lunch. We end up hanging out, and I meet Chris. We go to Chipotle and we have a good time, and I have him on the podcast. Super nice gentleman. We go and we have a great chat on the podcast. You can listen to it on my show. I go home, plug in the SD card because I interview him. I put it on the SD card, and I go home and I plug it in, and here's what I see. I see a recursed empty folder of nothingness. And I find myself just sitting there like this, just like I thought I was going to die. I'm like, I don't want to waste this very kind gentleman's time. I am completely screwed. We have lost the entire interview. Do I just not never call him again? What do I do when he calls wanting to know why the show didn't come out? So I started digging. I looked at the hard drive, and I could see that even though it said it was empty, it also said it had 300 megs of data on it. Now, I'm a coder. I would say I'm probably a little more low level than most of the folks in our community here at this conference, but I'm by no means a forensic low-level programmer. But I do know that layers exist. So I started digging around, and I started reading specifications and learning about things. And, I understand a little bit of numbers. And I could see as I read about how a file system should be laid out that there was some corruption, there were some problems on this particular disk. And I was able to go and say that this should be this. And I rebuilt this, this disk and found the WAV files from the interview. Not that I'm a fancy programmer, not that I'm any more clever than anyone else, but that I acknowledged that there is a layering in the world there. And while we are thinking mostly about applications at the high level, I was empowered to go down a level, to go down a level, go down a level. This is the equivalent of being an Uber rider. The car broke down and I learned how to change a tire. And I'm very proud of myself for having done that. And in the process, I collect these patterns. So now I've seen that before. If I ever have a problem with disk corruption again like this, or an SD card that goes wrong, I feel more empowered than ever before that I can handle that situation. And that is extremely powerful. As we get towards the end here, I want to jump ahead because we've only got about 10 minutes more, and I'm hoping that we'll have some questions to answer. I'll just tell one last very brief story, and then we'll bring Abby back and we'll answer a couple of questions as we head out to start the rest of the day. All right. Another interesting problem that I had recently was I had an application that I was working on, and this is scary and low level, but I did a diff. You see these squares here that say 0D? If we look over here, you see how there's no 0D there? I had a file that wouldn't run, and I couldn't figure out why. And it turns out that when I was FTPing the file, when I was transferring the file, it was treating it as a text file. So my file got corrupted when I copied it from place to place. And it turns out that that 0D that was missing is actually a carriage return. And what's a carriage? Well, a carriage return is the command that tells the typewriter or the printer to take the carriage that holds the paper and return it, move it all the way over. You have a carriage and you return it. I have actually my Lego typewriter right here. And carriage return line feed, CRLF. Those are things we think about all the time when we're editing text files. That is a 100-year-old concept that was put in to control typewriters, and we still think about it in our text files today. Abby.
I just love this story with the typewriter. You and I chatted about this, about how although I may be much younger, our parents are actually the same age. And my parents instilled in me a ton of making sure I know how to use a typewriter. When everybody else got laptops, I got a typewriter. I had to white out and make sure I'm not making any mistakes. My mom made it very clear I don't have a backspace. So I just thought I would pop in. I love the typewriter. I love that you still have it on the side of your desk. Just needed
Everybody
to
should have a typewriter. Everybody should have a typewriter. These are great.
Yeah, they're hard to come by nowadays.
What's that?
I said they're hard to come by nowadays. You find them at the thrift store and they're always broken.
They are. I spend a lot of time at Goodwill, and I love that kind of stuff because understanding that, people who are struggling with Git source control and don't understand why their carriage returns and their line feeds aren't working, someone should make a documentary on these things to understand when you're typing in the DOS prompt or the command prompt, there's many, many years of history. And the funny part is that it wasn't a great master plan. They were just making stuff up. They're like, we need a character that feeds the paper. Oh yeah, we need another character that moves the thing back to start at the beginning of the line. Okay, let's make that 13. Okay, cool. What's in the line? Let's make that 10. Those people are long gone, and now we're dealing with that when we go to Notepad and we press enter. I just find that to be fascinating, and I file it away because one day a file will get corrupted or something won't work on the internet, and I'll go, hang on, I recognize that. That's the thing. There are those stories that we collect and share. And now, 3 years from now, you're going to bump into some weird file corruption thing, and you'll remember this, and then you'll share it, and then you'll share it.
We've talked about it a couple times now, from my mom down to you, now down to this. I should know. And we see the Diet Coke has made a nice early morning appearance. I see it's not in the cup this time, though. It's not from McDonald's.
So I had to get up at 6 a.m. for this talk. So I didn't have time to go to McDonald's and have my morning breakfast. So I have the tiny Diet Coke, not even a regular can size. This is the one that makes my hands look giant.
It's very tiny. That's why you got to start drinking just a little bit of coffee in the morning.
I should put it in a coffee cup and I'll look fancy.
Yes, it works. You don't know what's in here. It could be coffee. It is, but it could be Diet Coke. You never know.
So we've got about 5 minutes more. What's a question that we have from our friends in the audience?
Well, one person said, "Aren't text messages green? Aren't the green text messages on your iPhone just emails?" I just thought that one was funny. I don't know if you want to go into that at all.
Okay, so are the text messages in your iPhone just emails? They're not, but they are just text. And have you ever received either a text message or an email where you thought at the end of it they were trying to like maybe put an emoji, but you got
Mhm.
a square, like a black square
With
or
a
a
little question
J
mark.
or a question
Hmm.
mark? That's
Hmm.
because the data that is trying to express that character, that emoji, is there, but maybe the font isn't, or the system's like, I have this character up to this point, but I don't have that final character. Sometimes you'll open a text file and it'll look like it's Chinese or it look like it's Japanese. It's not really. It's that it was trying to decode that list, that string, got confused and said, it must be Chinese, and then switched it. So there's a whole fascinating process about learning about those things. And I actually have a YouTube channel that's called Computer Stuff They Didn't Teach You. And at that channel, I actually walk through a bunch of these topics, and like what happens when you type a URL in the web browser and press enter. And then I have a whole section on Unicode and character encoding down in here. Where is it? So that's a great. There we go. Text editor. There it is. Code pages, character encoding UTF-8. So I'll walk through that. So for our friend who is interested in like text and text messages and how text moves around the internet, that is up there and is a pretty good talk. And it's actually closed captioned as well, which is uh, another example of using text in an effective way. Good questions.
And we got a good one, a good double question. It says, "What is your advice to someone who is technically excellent, but communication is not a strength, and they often get frustrated with the users? On the inverse of that, how do others communicate with that person?"
Wow, what a wonderful and difficult question. Computers are way more about talking to humans than I think anyone ever thought when they got into the job. It is, I thought it was 70% coding and 30% talking to people, and it's the opposite.
Yeah, here we are.
And here we are, right?
Yeah.
There's an interesting YouTube channel called Charisma on Command that basically takes interviews with charismatic people and breaks them down like code and explains like, watch this individual interact with a news anchor who is aggressive. Look at how they disarm that person and turn them from a foe to an ally. To take like, look at how those conversations shifted from here to here through specific conversational techniques. Being reminded about things like there's a difference between listening and waiting for your turn to talk. A lot of times in technical conversations, people are in fact not listening at all. They're simply waiting in turn for their chance to say something. And there are specific techniques that you can learn that will not only make you charismatic, but also a better communicator. I would say to the person who is having challenges in communicating is that there are specific techniques. There are books, there are classes, there are even things like public speaking classes like Toastmasters, where one can learn to be a more effective communicator if in fact the goal is to become an effective communicator. I know it can be really challenging for people sometimes, but there are hundreds of years of really great books and knowledge about being better at humaning, because we're all just big squishy meat bags doing our very best.
Kind of in with that, and I know we've gone over this a little bit in the beginning, but I figured we would just loop it back around. Someone asked, "What's your view on developers hiding their code versus leaving it more open source for others to understand how it works? Some form of sharing knowledge per se."
That's a great question and a good place to end, because I am a personal big fan of open source. I've been working at Microsoft now for many years. I think that providing services built on top of open source code is the way to go. I'm a huge fan of open source. Unless you have a proprietary algorithm that's like some patented secret sauce, very likely whatever you're writing is not as interesting as you think it is, that it needs to be hidden from people, right? If it's something, medical or secret or super important. I understand reasons like that. But for the most part, most of us are just doing text boxes over data and, making forms for the DMV. I don't think those things benefit from being closed source. Putting good information out there, like the whole point of this talk, put good stuff out there and people will benefit. And that good stuff, if you're not a great communicator or you don't want to mentor, put out your great code, put out your great apps, put out templates for your great apps so that Abby and I can learn and build apps of our own. So yes, I am a big fan of putting your code out there.
And do you want to do one last quick question or do you want to wrap up here? I got one really
one
good
last
one.
quick question. We're being told that we're out of time.
Okay. If you identify someone to engage in a mentor-mentee relationship, what's the best approach to convince them that this might be a good idea?
That's a complicated one. Don't just email them and say, can I pick your brain? Have a plan. Show up with I'm interested in mentorship. I have some questions. Show up with an agenda. Respect their time. Don't just randomly email people on LinkedIn because we need to assume that people are busy. The first step is showing up. Show up at conferences like this, at user groups, at get-togethers, at meetups. Be present first, and then try to get that mentorship relationship.
I love it. Everybody said, great. Thanks, Scott. So I think that's kind of where we're at. If you have any final words, speak now or forever hold your peace.
No, I think this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your help. And thank you to everyone who's watching and to all of our friends at the conference and the conference organizers. I hope that you have a great show.